Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast, brought to you by Mayo Clinic. I'm your co-host, Dr. Brittany Scruggs.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Eric Bothan. We are here to bring you the latest and greatest in ophthalmology, medicine, and more. Today we are joined by Joan Jaeger to discuss Hadley, a nonprofit that provides free practical and emotional support to older individuals with acquired vision loss. Tune in to learn more about Hadley.
Joan Jaeger is a Midwestern native from Milwaukee with a background in international relations, business, and brand strategy. She earned a double major in international relations and Russian language from the University of Wisconsin and an MBA and master's degree in Russian and East European studies from the University of Michigan. She began her career at Johnson & Johnson, where she was selected for an international development program and lived and worked across Eastern Europe, building global consumer brands. She later served as Chief Marketing Officer for The Cradle, a child welfare agency specializing in infant placement. Joan joined Hadley in 2016 and helped lead the organization's relaunch to focus on older adults adjusting to uncorrectable vision loss due to age-related eye disease. She now serves as Executive Vice President of Organizational Impact, focused on maximizing Hadley's real-world impact. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you. It's really nice to be with you guys.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. And so for the listeners who may not be familiar, can you really share what Hadley is and who do you serve today?
Absolutely. So Hadley is a 100-year-old organization. It was started by a gentleman named William Hadley and his ophthalmologist, by the way. And William lost his vision as a side effect, actually, complication due to the flu epidemic of 105 years ago. And he was a school teacher, actually, in Chicago. And so over the course of a weekend, he went blind. And his ophthalmologist, it happened to be his neighbor, did three really good things for William Hadley and really for the world, as it turns out. The first thing he did is he made sure the neighbors, the friends in the neighborhood, didn't ignore William simply because he lost his vision, and because he saw it so frequently with his other patients that the disability isolated them from their community, and he knew how harmful that could be. And so he just encouraged the neighbors to continue to stop in and chat with Bill and keep him in the loop of things. So that was the first thing he did. The second thing is he listened to Bill and understood what was bothering him, what he wanted to be able to do with his life going forward. And the main thing Bill was grieving at the time was he couldn't read anymore. And he was a learned man. He had amassed a library of books, none of which were useful to him anymore. And so what his ophthalmologist, Dr. Brown, said is, Bill, why don't you learn a new way to read? It's called Braille. And so he did. He taught himself Braille. I like to think his wife had a little something to do with that, because there are pictures where she is involved in helping William learn some Braille. And from there, once again, in conversation with Dr. Brown, his ophthalmologist, Hadley got the idea that he could use not only his skill with learning Braille, but also that he's an educator and he could reach out to other people like himself and teach them that new way to read so that they wouldn't feel so adrift, that they could get back to meaningful literature and reading again. And so that's what he did. And that's how Hadley was formed as an organization. As a group, the two of them reached out to local philanthropists, got some money together, and launched what was then the Hadley Correspondence School. And so that's how the organization was founded. And funny little first tagline, as I am a marketer, I love taglines. It was basically called Braille by Mail, because he was teaching people at a distance how to read Braille. And so really from the very beginning, Hadley was founded on this principle of helping older adults like William Hadley himself get back to living a life of purpose and meaning.
I'm struck by that beautiful combination that the neighbor had as an ophthalmologist to help introduce hope through particular mechanical help and reading aids. But
Yeah.
very much parallel to that is this neighborly emotional connectivity support. I think
True.
there's a lot that, come on, what I understand about Hadley, you do beautifully in both arms. Could you share right now, from an ophthalmologist perspective, I think we hope that we're being the neighbor to our patients. But
Yeah.
where do you see ophthalmologists, and for the eye care community listening, where do you see us as we strive to be neighborly, be physician caring to them? Where do we let go, stop, not, or maybe not aware of the opportunities to help our patients with vision loss?
It's a really good question. And I love the idea that because you have such an opportunity, you have a unique opportunity that to intersect in that moment, when folks to a person are feeling that loss, right? Or feeling adrift. And to just be a little bit of that hope for them can make all the difference. And so I think oftentimes, and this is, I'm going to quote some of the members of the Hadley community here. And it's natural. You're focused on the medical aspect, and you by nature of your job, you likely have time constraints on how much time you can spend. And so, of course, you're spending the majority of every moment you're with a patient on the medical aspects. But if you even just take a moment to understand that there is a person connected to the eyes, and that they are grieving something that they used to have. Just even knowing that that person, that physician understands that they're grieving something will make a big difference, because it'll change a little bit of your interaction. And it will be more likely that they would say something to you. They might even say, I'm really struggling with this. And you will have that opportunity to then be there for them and make referrals, which, of course, and I know you all know this, but referring to help outside your office is how you extend your help.
So I love that you started with that story, and I love that you, Eric, kind of brought in the neighborly aspect, because we are in a smaller town, right? In Rochester, I can't go anywhere without seeing a patient, and I would like to think I'm one of the very few eye doctors in my neighborhood, and I see a lot of neighbors. And so we are treating our friends, and our patients are really important to us. And so when they are sitting there, our patients, and we are trying to treat them like family, and they are dealing with this potentially new vision loss, this new experience that they weren't expecting, and it's uncorrectable. What are some of the common challenges that you hear that are common at the early stages? And then how can Hadley help?
Yeah. Really, really important to know that for most people, it is something they hadn't expected. This is a huge shift in their life. And with any of us, when something unexpected could happen, or life seems to be shifting, the tendency is to be in denial. To assume, to hold on to the fact that, well, maybe, okay, they might have mentioned this disease, and maybe I don't even want to Google that. I don't want to know what could happen there, because in my case, it probably won't be that bad. And so there can be a tendency to just assume that it's all going to work out and they're going to regain the sight they once had. Oftentimes, I will hear members of our community say early on, they didn't even want to ask a question to the doctor because they didn't want to hear the answer. Right. And so they were so much in denial that they just kind of kept to themselves and pretended nothing happened. And it was only with time, when it wasn't getting better, and in fact their eyesight might have been deteriorating, that they started to do some more research on their own, or they may have been asking more questions of their physician and hearing the more the long lasting impacts of the impairment. And that's where it can then lead to desperation or isolation or depression. It's hard for many of us to give up roles that we've held to, our whole lives. We might have been that person that everybody turns to when the going gets rough. And all of a sudden, we're supposed to ask for help. That's hard, right? It's hard for us to recalibrate and to admit to ourselves, much less to others, that we're going to have to find new ways to do things. We're going to have to adjust the way we feel about some things. We're going to have to, share maybe feelings that we never, we might be very private people, and sharing how we feel about things can be really hard. But what we hear amongst our community over and over again is once people open up a little bit, maybe get matched with a peer also going through something similar, it can make the world a difference. They can feel so much less alone and so much more supported. And then they're a little bit more open to try maybe the latest gadget, or learn different techniques about that don't rely on vision so much. But for many, those early months, maybe even up to the early year, they can be stuck.
So you said the word match. Can you just share with our listeners what that means in this setting?
Yeah. So at Hadley, we have two arms, and I think we alluded to this already. Basically, two arms to our services. One is very practical help. We'll help you, learn how to use that latest app to read the menu in a restaurant, or technique to put your toothpaste on your toothbrush if you've lost some central vision, and that simple task is all of a sudden not so simple. We can help you learn all those things. And we have a staff of social service professionals answering our 800 number, who will take the time to understand what's difficult for you and connect you to whatever help looks like for you. And so for some, it is just pointing them in the direction of that practical help, but for others, it is connecting them with a peer. So it might be that you have advanced macular degeneration. You used to love to read and to garden, and you're kind of a private person, and maybe you live alone. So we gather all that information. We use a database that is rather sophisticated, because it helps us then in the background comb our database for others who might share those similar qualities. And so we have, by the way, about 200,000 members of the Hadley community. And so we can reasonably quickly match people for in a peer relationship. And what that means is basically calling on the phone. Maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once every other couple of weeks, just to touch base. How's it going? I know you had a wedding coming up and you were a little nervous about interacting with your family. How did that work? It gives them just a chance to share what's difficult for them, but also what's just life for them. And they may share tips and tricks about vision aids and what have you, but oftentimes people move beyond that to just become friends.
I think it's really great to dive into both the practical support side and certainly the emotional side. Just for the listeners understanding this opportunity with Hadley, can you share when is the right time to introduce that with patients? And through that, then what are the encouragements for patients being introduced? What are the barriers that challenge patients to make that first step?
Yeah.
Financial, intimidation. What would it be that you see that you'd want to communicate? So first, from a physician side, when should we be suggesting it? And number two, how do we help equip them that they get through that barrier to make the first call?
Both really good questions. And I'll tell you, I would say early and often, because some people won't be able to hear the first time something is said to them. But if you mention it a few more times, if it just becomes part of a conversation, that almost assuming that some things are more difficult, listening for that, and then making that referral, saying just, give Hadley a call. It's as easy as calling an 800 number or going onto our website at hadleyhelps.org. And either way, we'll connect you pretty quickly with some help and accommodations to your needs. And so there's never a perfect time. You're not listening for exactly one phrase someone says that's going to trigger a referral. I think it needs to be early and often, because it matters. It's not going to be, as I said, that one perfect time. At diagnosis, it might be overwhelming, the number of things that are given to a patient. It might be overwhelming, as we already talked about. You might be in denial and say that must be for someone else, not for me. But with time and repetition, that's where different resources can become, that just basically sinks into your consciousness, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that.
So
So
I'm a
that's from that
pediatric
side.
ophthalmologist. I just would be curious, is there
Yeah.
certain visual field or visual
Yeah,
acuity or
no, it's a
diagnoses
really
that
good question, doctor, because there's not, and here's the difference. There's many things that are similar to Hadley versus like a state services for people with visual impairment, and then there's differences. So the similarities are we can help you with practical things and teach you what tools are out there. We don't sell any of the tools at all, though. We're just going to, tell you what's out there, what we think of them. We can but where the differeces lie is in the state services, because there are limited resources of people and their time. There's thresholds, right? You have to have, a certain acuity level or worse, or certain visual field or narrowness, in order to qualify for services. And you don't need anything like that with Hadley. We require no doctor's notes at all. There's no waiting lists at all. There's no need to come to our offices here at all. Our help comes to you, and everything is free of charge. So that's just important to know. And with physicians working with children, what we see often is their parents come to Hadley. Their parents come to Hadley and they learn some of the things that are out there, some tips and tricks on how to approach daily life, so that they can be sitting alongside their child as they're learning those things in school too.
That's awesome. So you said that there are about 200,000 members
Mm-hmm.
currently
Mm-hmm.
at Hadley.
Yes. Yes.
We do have many patients who have just raved about, Hadley and the peer support groups, so much so that we actually had your team come in person and do a grand rounds for our entire department a few months ago. And that was an amazing lecture where we all, I think, learned a lot about the resources and how we can do a better job as ophthalmologists and optometrists to share a little bit about your organization. But I wanted to just kind of share a few things that I learned from that grand rounds. One is that 9 million Americans have vision loss, and one of your goals is to increase the membership of Hadley to at least 1 million by 2030. Is that correct?
That is exactly right.
And so since that grand rounds, I think we have actually potentially improved your membership, because every patient we feel like would benefit from it, we give them a handout that has the website and the information and their phone number. And I think maybe we should put up the website so people can see it for those who are watching YouTube. And for people who are just listening, the website has these large text buttons that you can click, and it says practical tips. And I've gone to this website many times because I want to know what I'm offering patients.
Terrific.
And if you click on the practical tips button, it has daily living, adjusting to vision loss, recreation, technology, braille, and working. Mm-hmm. And then the next button is social and emotional support, which has peer-to-peer discussion groups, which we talked about, and then adjusting and coping together groups, which I think we should talk about in a second. And then community voices and expert opinions, which has so many videos of people who understand what it is like to have vision loss, and potentially experts who can guide in management and teach in a different way. So I just wanted to share kind of what the website looks like with our listeners and open it up to you to maybe add to that.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that. And so, on our website itself, you'll see something we call workshops. They're basically little video tutorials that cover the gamut, as you were talking about, practical, daily living tasks, technology tools, websites that might be helpful for folks. You could also still learn some Braille with Hadley. And doing that all from the comfort of your home. And if you're not online, we will send that information to your home, either in large print or in audio format, or in Braille for Braille readers. And so that's just important to know as well. And as far as the podcasts are concerned, we have two of them. One is called Hadley Presents, and there we welcome experts in the field to let our community know about maybe a new service that's out there, or an old service that is just not known very well. Or, we'll have our community members get on often to share things they've learned and the way they've, like, for instance, organized their kitchen, the kind of tools they're using to make cooking easier for themselves. So that's Hadley Presents. And the other podcast we have, it's called Insights and Soundbites. And this one, it came as a very, very simple premise, which is help our community have the opportunity that I personally, Joan Jaeger, as interviewing many of our community members, give them the opportunity that I have, because I get to hear the stories from each of them. So I wanted to share their stories with them, so that it's a community generated show, and it's the idea to call in, say a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your eye condition, what you might be struggling with, and then what one thing has helped you. And it has been tremendously successful. I can hear over and over and over again the messages from our community of people saying, finally, I'm hearing people like me. I'm just listening to that one episode, I feel like I'm not alone anymore. It's been a tremendous feeling of satisfaction on my part to hear that people find hope in listening to those podcasts.
It's striking how complementary these are, and that goes back to our neighborly feel that we had before. So much of what I've learned about Hadley appreciate uniquely is not the practical support, but it's what you're touching on now. The interpersonal storytelling that's therapeutic, not just for the teller because of the journey they've carried and struggled through and found hope through, but then what that means for someone else hearing. And as you're testifying and sharing the website, the podcasts, these peer-to-peer connections, it's just striking how much the stories are helpful. Both the stories for rising up and making an effort, but also the stories about which tools help the most. So can you share, how does your social work team, from the phone call comes in, what would a patient experience to get plugged in, to start hearing those stories? How do you launch them as they're doing their investigative work and then coaching, encouraging?
Yeah. Well, really, it's down to the individual. So every call is unique, of course, because every caller is unique. And so what the social support team does is really just try to understand the person, get them to explain a little bit about, kind of like what Bill Hadley's ophthalmologist did. Ask what's been difficult for you now. What are you struggling with? And for some, it becomes then pretty clear on what kinds of support they need, very practical support. And for others, we may need to do a little bit of probing and digging underneath that a little bit more, and understanding, well, when you say you just can't get out anymore, what does that mean? What used to give you joy in going out? Is it that you're afraid about movement, or is it that you're embarrassed because you can't read the menu anymore? So that we really do take that time to really understand what somebody is truly struggling with, so that it's not superficial. Right? Not just, we're going to send you a large printout on the latest gadgets and all will be done. Instead, really taking that time to understand the person and what will help them uniquely. And then as we get to know someone more, we'll invite them to be in the peer-to-peer program. We may invite them to be in a support group, whatever is going to work for them. And we will plug into that resource for them. And then with time, we absolutely do suggest that people consider sharing their stories, because you never know when somebody is going to resonate with exactly your story. And so we encourage every community member to share. And then for some, where they might be shy and saying, well, I don't know what I'm going to say, I'll say, well, let's just jump on a phone call. why don't we just jump on the phone call? Because I just had a delightful time chatting with you. We can just record the call. And trust me, I can edit it. And so many of the episodes end up that way too.
I have a question about the support groups,
Sure.
discussion groups in general. So one thing that I heard from patients and also from the Grand Rounds experience we had recently, and I thought this was pretty unique, so I would love some clarification. But,
Sure.
sometimes it's hard for patients to either remember that there's going to be a specific time for a discussion
Yeah.
group, and sometimes it's hard for them to even find on their calendar and click the button and join. So it seems like
Yeah.
you've kind of decreased barriers, one of which, they just get potentially a phone call that they just accept, and now they're in the group. It's like at that time they
Exactly.
got the call. And so maybe share a little bit about that and how you've decreased
Absolutely.
barriers for the patients to get them the best care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we do have a whole host of discussion groups on, for instance, cooking or gardening or what have you. And those are every month for an hour, and they're basically Zoom calls. They're audio only. But because we know for many of our community members, technology isn't their friend. At least it isn't right now. So we don't require you to go on a website and click on a link. In fact, you could just ask us to call you 15 minutes before that monthly group. We'll call you. All you have to do is answer the phone and you're in the group. And so we learned
Pretty
that
great.
relying upon technology only was never going to serve the number of people that we knew could use our help. So we added that call out feature. So all you would have to do is pick up the phone. And we do the same for our emotional support groups. And they're slightly different in nature than the discussion groups. The discussion groups are on things like, as I said, on technology, it might be on cooking, but the emotional support groups are a dedicated time, a dedicated cohort that are going to meet 8 weeks in a row at a certain time. So it might be Tuesdays at 10 o'clock for 8 consecutive Tuesdays. And those are led by social workers, and it's a small group. Discussion groups might be up to 50 people in the Zoom room. The support group is going to be usually like 10 people. Because you want each and every participant to have a chance to share and share things about like how difficult it could be to ask for help, for instance, how hard it might be to realize your relationships are changing a bit due to your vision loss. And so those groups are smaller in nature and basically facilitated by a social worker. But also we will call you to have you join into the group. You do not need to be, on a device of any kind other than using a phone.
In hearing more about Hadley too, I understand there's a new series called Adjusting and Coping Together. Can you share a
Yes.
little bit about this series and who it's designed to help?
Absolutely. So the Adjusting and Coping Together video series is based upon, really founded on those emotional support groups that I mentioned just a bit ago. But we know how very powerful those groups are. We get tremendous feedback where people will say things like, "Finally, I've had a chance to share something that has been on my heart for years." And feeling unburdened by having done that. And so we knew, though, as we talked just a bit ago, that Hadley's North Star goal is to reach 1 million members by 2030. How are we going to do that 10 people at a time in these groups? And so we wanted to find a way to scale that help. And so we committed to finding member stories that match each one of the categories or the themes for the different topic areas of our Adjusting and Coping Together support group. And then each one of the videos in the series highlights a certain topic and then gives some therapeutic advice afterwards. So for instance, on grief and loss or emotional triggers and asking for help or feeling like a burden or relationships or isolation and loneliness and self-esteem. Those are topics we cover in that support group that we were then able to amplify it to many more people via this video series.
So before we move on, let's go ahead and share a short clip about Hadley's upcoming series that we just talked about, the Adjusting and Coping Together. Before we watch the clip, could you just give the listeners a little heads up of what they're about to hear?
Right. So you're going to hear from one of our the members of the Hadley community, named Ron Peterson, and he's going to share a little bit about himself and a little bit about his challenge with vision loss, and specifically how hard it was for him to ask for help. He's one of these guys who just that doesn't come naturally, and many of us are like that. And then he shares about how he learned new ways to do some of the things he used to love to do.
My name is Ron Peterson. I went to school and studied engineering and had a successful engineering career and retired about 10 years ago. And I began working as a volunteer at the Tijuana estuary. Then about 5 years ago, I lost my vision to glaucoma. And it kind of surprised me. I wasn't really prepared for it. I guess I was in denial. And I wasn't able to work at the estuary. It just became harder and harder. And finally, I just couldn't do any of that sort of thing anymore. That was very disheartening to me. And I was really in a funk there, kind of in a deep hole for a few months. Losing your vision can throw you into a bad place. But one of the things you learn when you're blind is you need help. And I learned places to go to for help. And so one of the things I did was I talked to the staff there at the estuary. Said, I want to continue to volunteer here. And I love these plants. What can we do? And how can I help? And together we came up with this perfect solution that I would become a docent and I would guide visitors in sharing the beauty of these native plants using the other four senses besides vision. Turned out to be a big hit. What it did for me was amazing. It gave me a sense of meaning, and that was a very important part of how I climbed out of that hole. To regain my life, to develop a full life once again, for me, it worked.
It's inspiring to watch these stories and just think about the impact on individuals listening to them and having, as you mentioned earlier, resonance over the concerns, challenges, and things that they miss doing in their life. Can you talk about the reduction in isolation in particular? Because I would imagine the world gets smaller and then they see these videos, they see these stories, and suddenly they have opportunities. But how do you hear from your customers and patients that you support about how this changes their life?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just the little thing that can make all the difference in the world. And so I remember hearing from one of our community members where she was just feeling like life was over because she couldn't work anymore. She felt like she couldn't even leave the house anymore. She felt so isolated. And I was saying, yeah, I've heard that from other people that they're feeling like it's hard to imagine leaving the house even for the first couple of months. She said, Joan, I didn't leave my chair for the first few months. I was just so nervous. I was so worried that I was worried I was going to fall, but worried that what others would think of me now. And so the pressure of that is not small. And so what she said is that it came to her that she couldn't just sit in bed. She couldn't just stay in her chair. She needed to push herself just a little bit. And what she did is turn down her computer, typed in to Hadley or to Google, who could help me. And she ended up on Hadley listening to our insights and sound bites. And she said tears were just streaming down her face. And she's like, yes, there are other people going through this. There is hope for me. And that is priceless.
So I think all of us as clinicians want our patients to feel supported and have that experience of I'm not alone. As clinicians, we might not be the best people to relate in that way because we haven't experienced vision loss, and sometimes it does require that connection with someone who's experienced what they've experienced. And so what are some simple things, practical things that we as clinicians, ophthalmologists and optometrists, what can we do? And say there's someone listening and they want their practice to start, talking about Hadley. Is there a pamphlet or a handout? What can you offer?
Yeah. There is, and I think within the mail ecosystem, there is a specific brochure now that's even in your short codes or your dot codes.
Yeah, our smart phrase.
That you can. Yes, your smart codes. I'm like trying to learn your lingo, but didn't know it. So that you can hand that one pager out to your patients, or hadleyhelps.org. That is the one website that they could start at. And by the way, the people that answer our 800 number will also connect them to in-person help. So no matter where in the world they live, we could find a state agency that they could also call in order to get help that comes into their home. So we connect people with all sorts of resources, including Hadley's.
Any other advice for clinicians listening on how to speak to patients going through this? You talked about awareness, but any other tips or advice on things? Try to avoid saying those words, or please consider adding these words in your vocabulary.
I actually do have some, and I was thinking, I'm wondering if they're going to be open to this, but I'm going to go there because I think it's helpful.
Sounds great.
So there's several things that I've heard through my years here that I think that would be helpful if you heard. So first thing was that what is distance making between a patient and a doctor is when they hear something that sounds something like, well, you're lucky. Because, a few years ago, decades ago, you would have gone blind and we were able to save a lot of your sight, so you're lucky. Or you're lucky because today there are so many tools and gadgets out there that can help you. And, back in the day, there weren't any because the patient is not feeling lucky. Right. And so, yes, there is that. I mean, reality is many more patients will keep a fair amount of their vision because of today's medicine and your care. That's reality, and that's wonderful. But the other part of reality is they're not feeling lucky. And so it does have a tendency to create distance. Another phrase that our members repeat back to us over and over again is hearing from a physician, whether it was said this way or not, right? But this is what they're hearing and playing back is there's nothing that can be done. And so when they hear there's nothing that can be done, likely that's in the context of the medical situation of the physical nature of the eye condition. But what they're hearing is roll up the sidewalks, climb into bed, because this is it. It's over. And so to just be thinking that's how it's being played back to patients. And a third area that can be tricky is you may be equating the visual acuity or visual field to the impact that it's having on the patient. So for instance, a patient where you're thinking, well, it's rather moderate vision loss for them. Emotionally, it could be hitting them extraordinarily hard. Because from a whole host of reasons, whether that's a practical in nature or emotional, right? Just the nature of the person. And so I would say be careful not to just equate the level of impairment with the impact on someone's life. And another phrase that I've heard over and over again is just to remember there's a person connected to those eyes. And so taking that extra step really could make all the difference. And then just, connecting them to the kind of help that might be needed. And that's beyond your specific lane, but that is very adjacent to the needs that they're going to have. More
I think
than you
that's
were thinking
It's
for?
wonderful.
I think that's really helpful for all of us to remember. I think everyone who's listening can gain a lot from listening to that. So thank you. Is there anything else that you have on that table there that we need to hear?
Well, I think I alluded to this before, which is that, saying something once is likely not going to be remembered. But
For
having
sure.
if you're saying it to every patient, every visit, it becomes part of your routine, and they're more likely then to remember it, or to just have it resonate with them. And then there is a certain pressure that some of our community members feel to move on. Okay, start using that smartphone more. You can read now and just feel like that pressure to move on because you've learned some tips and tricks. It is still an emotional journey. It is. And feeling that pressure and then starting to just pretend that nothing is mattering anymore. That it just know that that's oftentimes in the background for the patients sitting in your chairs.
I have a
And
question
also,
about that,
yes,
if
please
that's
do.
okay. So I think you can answer this better than we can, even though we see patients with vision loss all the time. How long does it take through that grieving process once they lose vision to the point where they feel like they can start offering advice as a mentor and being a part
Yeah.
of the leadership of this group? Kind of walk us through the timeline there.
The answer to that is it really depends. Some people, and it's because of the way they're wired and perhaps the way they're supported outside, either by family and friends or others in their community. They can, they go through the process with relatively short period of time. Maybe it's only a year. And let me tell you, a year would be, I would say, a minimum. Right? For others, it's years that it takes for them to work through this. Because remember, also, I'd mentioned this, some get stuck in denial for a good long time, or they're stuck in just this feeling of depression for a good long time. And so working through anything else, it can vary and it can take longer than you might expect. And oftentimes, and I feel this way with myself, I am much more impatient with myself than I am with others. So you can start to think like, oh, for goodness sake, I should be over this by now, right? Everybody has their thing, and this happens to be mine, and I just need to get on with it. Well, that oftentimes isn't very helpful, right? To have the kind of patience with yourself that it takes some time and to give yourself time to work through.
And sadly, just thinking about that too, is the chapters of this. So many of the blinding conditions in adults have progressive components. And so
Yes.
even if they've adapted to one level, their disease state, one or both eyes, may be progressing, and it's just making the journey even harder, which adds another emotional component.
Exactly true. Anne, who shared her story in our episode on grief and loss, said it's just emotionally exhausting. As soon as I feel like I've got my footing, then it changes. And you have to adapt and readjust all over again.
Well, I just want to say thank you from my perspective for helping us gain sensitivity to this ongoing supportive opportunity that we have for patients, and appreciating how much Hadley is there to partner with us in supporting outside the clinic. And so I just thank you for the gift you are to our patients and our community.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank
Thank
you
you.
and your entire team. Thank you for what you do. The work that you're doing is very meaningful. So thank you for being on this episode.
It's an honor. Thank you for having us.
You can find all episodes of the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast on our website, YouTube, or on most podcast platforms.
Thank you for listening, and we definitely look forward to sharing more on our next podcast.